He was once a brother. Phygelus, a name mentioned only once in Scripture, might seem a footnote to history, but in that single reference lies a story of disappointment, betrayal, and a cautionary warning for every generation of believers. It began in the swirling storm of the Roman Empire, a time when to follow Christ was to walk in defiance of the world's might. The churches were young, vibrant, and fragile, clinging to the teachings of the apostles. And at the center of that flame stood Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, burning with zeal, scarred by trials, chained for the gospel. From Ephesus to Philippi, from Corinth to Rome, Paul had gathered fellow laborers. Men and women who walked beside him in prayer, in mission, and in suffering. Phygelus was one of them. He wasn't just a name in the crowd. He was close enough to Paul to be known. Trusted enough to be named. In all likelihood, he had heard the apostle preach with fire. He had seen miracles. He had watched the birth of churches. He had even witnessed persecutions and the triumph of faith through pain. But something changed. It wasn't long after Paul had been imprisoned in Rome for the second time. This was not house arrest with visitors and letters, this was a cold dungeon, where rats crawled and the air hung heavy with death. Paul, aged and weary, knew his time was short. And in his final letter, written to Timothy, his beloved son in the faith, he shared something deeply painful. You know that everyone in the province of Asia has deserted me, including Phygelus and Hermogenes. 2 Timothy 1 verse 15. Deserted. The word strikes like thunder. Paul doesn't say they simply drifted away. He says they turned their backs when it mattered most. When the stakes were highest. When standing beside Paul meant risk, persecution, and maybe death, they fled. What happened to Phygelus? Scripture is silent beyond this line, but history and human nature fill in the contours. The early church faced immense pressure from every side. Roman officials branded them traitors. Jewish leaders called them heretics. Their own families often rejected them. And when Paul was arrested, again, it sent shockwaves through the church. To be associated with him was to court disaster. Phygelus chose safety. He chose comfort over conviction. Reputation over righteousness. Fear over faith. Perhaps he reasoned with himself, what good would I be in prison? I can still serve Christ quietly. Or maybe he simply broke under the weight of fear. But the truth remains, when the shepherd was struck, Phygelus fled, leaving Paul to stand alone. Imagine Paul in his cell, the torchlight flickering against the stone. He remembers the faces of those he loved, those he discipled. One by one, he watches them disappear. The echoes of their promises, "I'll stand with you to the end," fade into silence. And then he writes. Not to shame, but to warn. Because Phygelus isn't just a name. He is a symbol. A reflection of every believer tempted to compromise when the cost of discipleship becomes real. Yet in the same letter, Paul mentions another. May the Lord show mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, because he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. 2 Timothy 1 verse 16. Two paths. Two legacies. Phygelus, who abandoned the mission. Onesiphorus, who embraced the suffering. Both knew Paul. Both saw the gospel lived out in power. But only one chose to carry the cross to the end. Phygelus fades from history. His name remains only as a warning. A flicker of what might have been, had he remained faithful. And that is the story's power. It reminds us that faith isn't proven by words shouted in times of peace, but by loyalty in the furnace of trial. It calls every disciple to stand firm when others walk away. It urges the church to hold tightly to its heroes, not only when they perform miracles, but when they bleed in prison cells. Phygelus left Paul. But Paul never left Christ. And in that final, flickering chapter of his life, Paul's words echo forward. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. 2 Timothy 4 verse 7. Will we?